All right, I think it's time to officially kick this off. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm Emma Stapleton. I am the Development Director for the Grammy Music Education Coalition. I'm pleased to be hosting today's Hub session, streaming live on Facebook. Thank you to everyone who's joining. This is our fourth week of hosting these live sessions. Each has been addressing a different topic related to the challenges and opportunities we're all facing due to COVID-19. Today's topic is one that is on everyone's mind, and I'm very honored that we have three expert panelists joining us to share their unique insights. I'll introduce them in just a moment. The topic for today is philanthropy. How are music and education funders working now? Given financial and teaching challenges, students now will need more support than ever. So we have three main topics to cover, and I'm going to ask each panelist to respond individually, given they come from distinct backgrounds, organizations, and sectors. And if you have any questions or comments, please be sure to add them to the chat. And we will address those either at the end of the conversation or whenever is most relevant. So to introduce our panelists, first we have Tarek Ward, who is the Director of Music Programs for Elma Philanthropies. Tarek also serves as our board chair for the Grammy Music Education Coalition and is a tremendous advocate for music education and equity across the board. Tarek's vision has led our board in guiding GMEC for the past 3 years, and we're very grateful. Tarek, please say hello.
Hello.
Thank you. Next, I'm very pleased to introduce Perrolli Knight, who is the Community Relations Consultant for Corporate Philanthropy and Community Relations at Wells Fargo. Hello, Perrolli.
Hi there, and you said that title without getting tongue-tied, so thank you so much.
That's once in a million.
Thanks for having me.
And then finally, our third panelist is Mandela Winter, who is a board member for the Country Music Association Foundation. Mandela wears many hats. He's been involved with the Black Alliance for Educational Opportunities in Tennessee and Kentucky. He served as the Deputy Chief of Staff for Students First in New York, and is the founder and executive director for the Campaign for School Equity. So welcome, Mandela.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So thanks again to all three of you for joining. Very glad to have you participating in the conversation today. And I think let's get started. Let's dive in. As you all know, we're witnessing a proliferation of responses to the COVID-19 pandemic from the philanthropic sector. So private foundations, grant makers are designing and launching a variety of different efforts. So my first question to ask each of you is to share what your organization in particular is doing in response to the crisis. This might involve a little bit of background on your organization as well, if you want to share. But give us your top priorities in terms of music and education. So I'm going to turn it over to Perrolli first.
Sure. So again, thank you for having me. And I'm happy to share what we're doing to be able to support. But before I do that, I don't even think that we at Wells Fargo can continue to provide support without the wonderful frontline folks that we have on the front line, our team members who are still, keeping us in business and keeping us active. So I just want to, first of all, just say thank you to them and to all the essential workers who are doing so much to keep us going, each and every one of us going every day and providing for our needs. So I just wanted to start by saying thank you to that. I think I would be remiss if I didn't start there. So to answer your question, what we're doing at Wells Fargo, so in addition to really making sure that we're trying to meet the needs of our customers at this time and everything that they're going through and keeping not only our customers, but our team members safe as we continue to provide services, philanthropically, we really took a look at a national and local level to see what we could do to expedite support to meet the emergency needs of those in our community. One of well, I should start with our focus areas. So our typical focus areas at Wells Fargo for philanthropic support are housing affordability, financial health, and small business growth. But of course, and in the midst of this pandemic, we really wanted to make sure that not only were we providing support in those areas, but also taking a look at other areas just to see where we can partner and kind of continue to create impact in those areas as well. And so we made sure that we reached out to all of our partner organizations that we already have relationships with, and we knew the great work that they were doing. And so included in a lot of those partners were also, a lot of our arts and culture nonprofit partners that we already have relationships with. So we really just wanted to make sure that we took the time to reach out to them, letting them know that we also made our grant making the process a little bit easier by creating an application that was easier for them to apply as opposed to the typical one that we were having before. And then also, I just wanted to make sure that in the past, we really made sure that we took a look at what organizations were doing programmatically and how we were supporting them in regards to their programs. But in light of COVID-19 and all of the issues that folks were facing, we decided to make sure that we let our nonprofit partners know that we were able to provide support for general operating. And that made a huge impact just because of the fact that we figured that the organizations would know better than what we would right now, what they need. So even specific to a lot of the music and education organizations, some folks may have needed help with just getting technology started to be able to provide services virtually, whereas other folks really just needed help to keep the lights on while they're figuring out what's happening. And so we really just decided that general operating support would be the best way to really help folks proceed in whatever way that was going to be best for them. And then the last thing I'll just say about that is that we recognize that in the midst of this pandemic, we're all affected by it, but everyone is not experiencing this pandemic equitably. And so one of the things that we really have focused on, I think a metaphor that I heard recently was that we're all in the midst of the storm, but we're not all in the same ship. And so because we recognize that, one of the things that we really wanted to make sure was that when we're connecting with our partners and those who we're supporting, as much as we're leaving it in their hands to say, hey, this is the support we're giving you and this is the funding that you have. And so, you're gonna have to do whatever it is that you see fit to make it through this time. We're also being very transparent about the fact that we want to be able to support and meet the needs of the most vulnerable right now. And a lot of times those are communities who are not getting services that they needed on all levels. It's not just in the space of music and education, but on all levels. And a lot of times those are also communities of color. So we're making sure that we're having those conversations to say, hey, what is it that you're doing? How can we be helpful? But we want to just keep that dialogue open, that we're actually focusing on those who have the most need at this time. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's super poignant in terms of, really the equity issue about how we're all experiencing this at a different rate, at a different gate. Is really important. And I applaud Wells Fargo and you, Perrolli, for the transparency that you guys are keeping throughout this. So with the same question of what you guys are doing organizationally in response, I'm going to turn it to, let's go with Tarek.
Hello. Yeah, so at Elma, we've got obviously a pretty broad portfolio, right? And even if I just focus on the music portfolio, which is working with organizations that have youth development organizations that have incorporated music into their work, the kinds of organizations that we interface with is a pretty broad range. So, in that case, what we're trying to do is try to be purpose fit. And I think, very much in line with what Perrolli had to say is, first things first was to check on our people, right? Was to, check in with our EDs and our program directors and really just see how they're doing, right? Because, if leadership is lonely, normally it's even lonelier now as, folks have been forced into even more isolated positions. So I think that was first and foremost. And then it's figuring out how to help them solve problems, right? So, whether that be, being flexible in funding, in some cases adding additional funding, in some cases, being flexible with terms, just really figuring out how to help folks navigate the space. And then I think it's understanding the very next piece, which is how do I help them keep connected to young people? I think that really is the bottom line for most of the organizations out there, is now that they sort of got hit with this and are settling into kind of what is this new steady state, is then figuring out how do they stay connected to young people. So, how do they create online spaces? How do they, move all of their work remotely? And what do they keep doing on site, if anything? So I think a lot of that is just being a thought partner for those organizations, and just being an ear, and not really needing anything from them, and just say, hey, listen, we're here if you need help, and that means, and we'll get to this a little bit later, but, are there places where they can go and find extra resources? Are there opportunities for them to get different funding to meet needs that may not have occurred to us before, right? Like getting laptops to young people, which is a problem we understood, but not a problem we addressed, right? So because we were kind of okay ignoring that for now because we could get by with young people leaning on these organizations to meet some of those needs. So I think for us, it's really just been a function of listening as much as we can and responding as flexibly as possible, and finding ways to help folks solve the old problems that they had already been working on that have just gotten worse, and navigate some of the new ones.
And Tarek, throughout ELMA, have other sectors and disciplines been doing much of the same, or is this just
Yeah. Yeah, it's particularly as we look across sub-Saharan Africa, where there are a different set of infrastructure problems that again were pre-existing, and now sort of adding this on top of that is a challenge, right? So I think in principle the response has been mostly the same in really thinking about how to be purpose fit with the support that we provide, and then really thinking about okay, how can we help these organizations navigate these spaces so that they can get to the other side. And I think the overall one overall feeling, while I think there is an urge to kind of get back to normal, I think there's also an undercurrent of saying, hey, wait a minute, normal didn't really work for a lot of us in the first place, right? That's why a lot of these organizations exist, because normal wasn't acceptable, right? And I think that's only been magnified now. So I think there's also a faction of folks who are now looking at the opportunity to say, okay, how can we use this to build new structures, and open up new lanes and think about new ways of being and doing. So I think that's happening across the board. Obviously, when you look at health infrastructure, obviously, when you look at recovery and relief to emergency situations, and even in schools, right? So now that these institutions have been forced to sort of step outside of their normal ways of being, it's really for some big questions that our team has been working alongside those on the front lines to help answer.
Yeah, it's a really critical question in terms of who are our first responders, and during different phases of the pandemic, how will it shift from healthcare medical workers to teachers, parents, arts organizations, things like that.
Yeah.
So Mandel, the same question comes to you. What are you and various organizations doing in response to the crisis?
Yeah, no, thank you so much again for having me, and just echoing what these two brilliant panelists have already shared, and just honoring and saluting our essential workers who are on the front lines during this. The Country Music Association Foundation is sort of the charitable arm of the Country Music Association. We exist due in large parts to the generosity of many country music artists and others within the industry. We believe strongly that every child deserves access to a proper music education, not just because we think that it's good for kids to have access to music, but because we understand music as a teaching and learning tool. We also understand that a great education really gives our students an opportunity to succeed. And given sort of the current pandemic, though there's no sort of rule book or playbook for how you approach this, our first priority was to our members in the industry that we serve, with live tours and shows being halted, postponed even. We saw significantly sort of the hardship that both them and many of our grantees were facing. So, we immediately partnered with the Country Music Association. We provided a $1 million gift to Music Cares, really to support our members who were financially impacted due to this pandemic. And then really we had to just sort of take a step back and think about folks that we wanted to serve. Obviously, there's sort of financial constraints and things that we had to take into account given this current situation. But we also really wanted to think about what are other opportunities and resources that we have access to that we can leverage to support both our grantees and our members. And I think about things like access to PR and marketing and consulting support. What are those ways that we can help out given sort of the new world and new reality that we face with, and just sort of continue to remind ourselves that obviously, we want to be people-centered and minded and support during this time, but also be mindful of, what's to come future. And so we continue to remain committed to our partners in the way that we can. If it's not financial, it's some other resource that we know that we can provide. And the other is just being open and honest and transparent in sort of our communication and flow. I think one of the things that our grantees of the foundation really love about us as a foundation is that the team is just really committed to communicating and talking with them and supporting them in whatever way that we can. And I think that's sort of the best thing that we can do, is be supportive and available during this.
Yeah, it sounds like a common thread I'm hearing is that the importance of transparency across the board is essential, especially almost giving more of a personal face and figure to your grantees, letting them know you're there, available for help. So actually, it's a nice segue, Mandel, into the second question that I have, which is, what are some other resources that are available right now? I'm hoping each of you can share some recommendations for resources for either organizations, teachers, parents, students, any of the above. And maybe Mandel, I'll keep you going since you're in the hot seat already.
Okay, sounds good. Well, one of the couple of things, we initially sort of encouraged our network to both attend and support many webinars that the Country Music Association was putting on. They're not specific to country, but were meant to help inform, provide best practices, information on both community and national resources for folks to tap given this time. And then two, really encouraging folks to think about, what are the resources that are available at the state, local, federal level that we can be tapping, understanding that, in different cities and different places, there are tons of different resources, from small business opportunities to nonprofit opportunities, and getting to my earlier point about sort of what we might be able to offer for some of our grantees, if they feel like they need some assistance with sort of some strategic planning or some consulting or even marketing, which we know for small nonprofits eats up a big chunk of their budget, trying to make sure that they have a solid brand. Are those opportunities that we can leverage and take advantage of? Tons of folks in our network are also hosting webinars, Zoom calls. And so, really trying to be a space to not only compile those resources, but share those out, right? Like not being afraid to say, hey, look, this organization is hosting this. We think that this is great for the work that you do. Here you go. And then, continuing, that trend, we just feel like that's the best way that we can just support our entire network. And then being just sort of, again, open and honest with them about sort of what we see, what we're hearing, and ways that we can help.
That's great and super helpful. I know our organization, our team is doing much in the same, trying to provide a hub of resources, trying to kind of accumulate all the information and knowledge that's out there between our coalition partners, and locating it in one central place. But as you said, another day, another Zoom meeting, right? So Perrolli, I'm gonna pass it off to you with the same question in terms of what kinds of resources are available.
Sure, thank you. And I think honestly, Mandel did such a great job of covering the fact that folks should be really reaching out on the government, state, local level for whatever resources are available to them. I would say, really looking into the community impact funds that have popped up during this time. I know specifically for us, so the regions that I cover for New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut, each of those states have had specific funds that are set to support organizations in the arts. And I don't want to get in trouble by calling out one and not the other, but I'll give an example for one in New York. And the reason I'll give an example for that is because one of my colleagues also serves on that committee. And so what we tried to do at Wells Fargo, like I said before, we have specific focus areas. And so just as Mendel mentioned, their commitment to their prior partners and affiliates, we had the same situation. And so with that being said, we have limited dollars as much as we still support other organizations outside of those focus areas. And so what we tried to do, in addition to the organizations that we were supporting directly, we've also supported some of the impact funds in different communities. So that way, even if we couldn't give a plethora of grants to several different organizations through those funds, they can still get the support that they need. So specifically in New York, I'll give the example of the New York City COVID-19 Response and Impact Fund. Not only did we support that, but then also, as I said, one of my colleagues are also on that committee. So we're still a part of that process in regards to, you know, the support and really understanding where those dollars are going. So I would just really suggest that wherever anyone is in their regions to see whatever impact funds are specifically happening right now regarding COVID. I would also say I was on recently the National Endowment for the Arts website. And I know that there's been a lot of chatter, which is very true across the country, about a lot of funding that's being cut. But in the meantime, there are resources that are available if people are looking. And so they have an extensive list, as well as organizations that are either providing funding support or just support in different ways for those who are artists or organizations in the arts.
Yeah, definitely agree with that last suggestion. Visiting the NEA, they have an incredible wealth of resources available for funding opportunities. So I'm gonna plug very quickly, if any of you who are watching on Facebook have questions, be sure to add them in the chat, because we wanna make sure that we're getting to as many as possible. And then I'm gonna turn this over to Tarek with the same question about resources that are out there and available.
Yes. So first, all of the above. You know, check your local folks, because there are a lot of relief funds that have been started up. So keep your ear to the ground, call your other EDs, you know, who your peers, even if they're not in your region or if they're slightly outside of your field, call them, because they're navigating these same troubled waters. So that's one thing I would say. Use your field and your peers as a resource. And, you know, checking the folks like VH1 Save the Music. They've been great about putting together resources for not just educators, but really anybody that's out there trying to connect with young people creatively. You know, check the National Guild for Community Arts Education. They're another place that has been a hub. And check your universities, right? Check Berklee School of Music, check Juilliard, they are all now, you know, Manhattan School of Music, they're all pumping out content that is free and available. And it doesn't have to be for college students, right? I think a lot of that stuff is applicable across wide ranges of folks. And don't forget your tried and trues, right? Stay connected to YouTube for kids. Audible for kids. There's a ton of content and free content on there for you to connect with young people. And don't discount a FaceTime and Hangouts and a phone call, even, to connect with folks and really stay engaged. And I think that's another place that you can, again, start sharing some of those ideas. And call your current funders, folks who you haven't heard from, who, you know, you've gotten checks from in the past. And even if you've gotten a check from them in, say, March or, you know, February or January, call them just to check in, to see how they're doing. And you never know where those conversations might lead. Even if it doesn't, you know, materialize to something immediately, that's something that you want. Those are relationships that you want to continue to nurture. And then, you know, what I would also say, I sort of interpreted this question differently as well in terms of resources, but, you know, understand that so many of the folks that we're talking about on the front lines and everywhere are parents too. So thinking about resources for them, right? So looking at, you know, different curriculum resources. I've got a couple here in front of me, quill.org. If you're thinking about, if you've got young people who are, you know, mastering writing and thinking about those kinds of things. EIE.org, they've got a ton of projects for parents to run through with their young people that are multidisciplinary, that can keep young people engaged. TNTP.org, the new teacherproject.org. They've got a ton of stuff out there for resources for when schools are closed, because I think that's a thing that is often neglected, is that the world didn't stop right? It keeps going, and these young people keep growing and keep learning. So finding ways to support parents, I think is a huge deal. And when I think about that in the context of, the program officers and the EDs that we work with on with our grantees, this is a huge deal, right? Because they're still trying to hold all these pieces together. So I think that's not to be discounted, right? When we think about the energy that they're going to be putting in to try to get these community grants and get these apply to these COVID funds. And would also encourage folks to take a look at the Lewis Prize. That's another place that creative youth development organizations ought to be looking at and to go check out, because I know that they've got a fund now. It's getting close to the wire. I think that closes on Friday at noon. But everybody should be looking at that to really start thinking about not just the dollars, but the thought exercise of how do you tell your story? Now that this is hit, collect those stories, understand and find ways to articulate the ways that you have adapted, that your team has adapted, that your young people have adapted, that your community has adapted, and capture those stories, because that's going to be the key going forward for, I think, a lot of folks. So that's going to be a huge asset going forward. So I think you ought to be thinking about collecting those stories so that you can tell them again later.
Yeah, that's great advice. I think even the Grammy Music Education Coalition and the fundraising that we do, so much has changed, just how you put pen to paper and talk about what the background is of the situation, the organization. I mean, kids aren't in school, and our number one mission is making sure that they have the available resources and curriculum and access to music in schools. So really, it's an opportunity to really shift, I think, your framework for how you're positioning your mission and vision. So that's good
Absolutely.
advice. I also think, Tarek, one thing you mentioned, last week's webinar was hosted by our colleague Sarah Robinson from the Metro Nashville Public Schools, and they spoke with 4 different teachers from across the country. And if you're looking for more resources for teachers, parents, students, there is a wealth of information there. You can find that archived on YouTube on Grammy Music Education Coalition's channel. So head over there if you're looking for more of those resources as well. To anyone who's just joined us, again, the topic today is philanthropy and how are music and education funders working together now, given the COVID-19 pandemic. We're about to jump into what is kind of our third topic, and then we'll open this up to any questions from anyone who's watching on Facebook. I have 3 great panelists with me today. I have Tarek Ward, Perrolli Knight, and Mandela Winter. Thank you all again for being here. It's been a great conversation so far. And I'm going to turn to this last kind of topic area, which is, what do you in your own area of expertise recommend that organizations do to ensure financial stability right now? How should we be looking at operations differently? And this is a touchy question, but what losses are we going to see as a result of COVID-19, and how do we offset that impact? I'm going to start this time with, let's start with Perrolli.
Lucky me. So thank you. And that's a really, really great question. I actually think I'm going to start where it seems that Tarek left off, made a lot of great points. And it actually leads into what I think the first answer that I would like to say, which is a diversification of support for funding, I think would be the probably the first place to start. I think in the previous question, we talked a lot about, where folks can find resources for support in regards to the arts, because, if you're an arts organization, that makes a lot of sense. But I think really diversifying where you can get support from, and really looking at the way that you can get folks to buy into your mission is going to be really critical moving forward. So that's not to say that folks should really operate outside of their area of expertise, but I think that sometimes if you take a look at, the services that you're providing and how maybe you can partner and provide services in a larger way, you may be able to also get support that's more diversified than what you're already doing. I'll give the example, because we already support the wonderful organization that is the Grammy Music Education Coalition. So at Wells Fargo, before 2020, I think going into 2020, that's when we really focused on the 3 focus areas that I mentioned earlier. But in around 2018, 2019, I think that we started having conversations, but between Lee and myself, also Emma, just really about where GMEC's focus was and Wells Fargo's focus was. And I think that we started talking more and more about the opportunity to provide financial education support, which really falls into our pillars. And so not only, are we able to support GMEC from the standpoint of them being an arts education organization, but because one of the things that they're focusing on falls directly into where we as a bank really want to be able to provide the support, gives us a whole opportunity, not just for right now, but in the future of how we can have further engagement and partner. So I think it's really important for organizations right now to take the time to find out how to, not only can they find ways that maybe diversify some of the services they're offering if possible, but then also trying to gain support maybe outside of the normal channels that they're typically looking to for that support. I would also say that as we move from the response part of this pandemic into the recovery part of the pandemic, there are going to be a lot of organizations and a lot of support that nonprofits are receiving from certain sources that may look and say, hey, we really have to unfortunately trim the fat or really look at where and how we're providing support. And so I think, once again, really just finding different ways that you can really expand on the mission and the way that you provide services, or just being creative in certain ways is going to really make an impact on how people view your organization, not just for right now, but how they may or may want to be supportive or engage with you in the future.
Yeah, that's great advice. I think, the conversations we've had, Perrolli, about working in financial literacy actually, I think, strengthens some of our programming with some of the students we're working with, because it's one thing to teach music, but music is really a vehicle for positive social emotional outcomes and career development. So
and if I could just I'm sorry, I just wanted to say one, I forgot to say one thing. In the midst of that, I think it's also a great opportunity to continue to partner with other organizations. And so, to the point of GMEC and what they did, I think in the example that I used in regards to you all providing financial literacy and really focusing more on not only production and songwriting and some of the programming that we did, specifically in South Jersey, but then also the music business and financial education piece, we had a great opportunity to partner with the DASH program. So I wanted to make sure that I mentioned them and the great work that they were doing, because that's an example of really combining resources to really expand what the mission is and what you're able to do. So I just wanted to add that part.
That's great. Yeah, no, DASH has been an incredible resource and program, and we're so thrilled to be affiliated with it, and so glad to have your support there as well. So I'm going to throw the same question over to Mandel. Again, what do you think is the outlook for organizations and financial stability, and what are we going to see as a result of COVID-19? What does the recovery phase look like? I like that term, Perrolli.
Yeah, no, I think a few things. I think the first thing, and just sort of thinking about sort of my own recommendations to organizations, teachers, parents, and students, is just start by like taking a deep breath and sort of giving yourself some grace in all of this, right? I mean, I mentioned earlier, we're sort of all going through this together. There's no sort of playbook or rule book for how you navigate through these times. And so I always just say, give yourself grace. We're going to have to make some tough decisions, or have had to make some really tough decisions. And so I think we start there. Piggybacking off of what Perrolli said, I think collaboration is going to be the key to not only make it through this, but also as we sort of reimagine what the future is going to look like, right? I think so many times for nonprofit organizations, especially, we're often competing for funding, and you're trying to figure out like, what's the one thing that makes my program a little bit different from that program. And I think it's a great opportunity for leaders to take a step back and think, what services and programs are we offering? What do we do really, really well? Where can we combine some of those services as we think about the operation side and maybe cutting some things down? I think that's going to be a huge way to think about. And I think for foundations like ours, who are trying to think about sort of how we combine and share resources and make sure that sort of beyond sort of the financial capacity that we have, I mentioned earlier, supports for marketing, for consulting, for PR, all of those things, how are we offering that and sharing that sort of across the board? I think is critical. On the operation side, again, sort of we all know that there's going to be some financial things that are going to be coming sort of down the pipeline. I think to Tarek's point earlier, I think in having conversations with your donors, I think being really, really honest about sort of where you are and what you need. I think so many times we say our need is what we think the funder wants to hear, but I think being very, very specific about exactly what you need, what you want now, but also in the future. What you need right now is going to look a little bit different in 6 months. And so being very, very clear about that and being honest with your funder. And I think, the best case scenario is you get what you ask for. The worst case is there's some flexibility there. But if you don't ask, you don't really receive. And I think that's really, really important. I think the other thing is, taking advantage of a lot of the resources that folks had mentioned earlier, figuring out where opportunities to cut resources there, and thinking about, how you sort of slowly bring those back into folk later, I think is going to be interesting. I think the other thing to keep in mind, not just for nonprofit organizations, but also to look at sort of the larger education landscape, and the implications of that. I mean, so many state budgets and local budgets have really cut a significant portion of education budgets across the country. And even though there's some federal relief coming in, if you look in New York City, for example, federal government gave $700 million to New York City public schools and relief efforts, the state turns around and cuts $700 million from their budget, right? And so I think understanding those implications and how that trickled down in effect, we know that our students and our school districts will likely suffer. And so I think now is a really great time to sort of think about, how you can communicate those efforts and advocacy over to your district leaders, to your elected representatives, and letting them know that, despite the circumstance, you do want them to prioritize music education and music programming across the board for students. I think that's the other big thing. And then the other thing is, when we talk about sort of return to normal or sort of post-pandemic, we know that people are still going to be a little bit nervous and fearful to kind of step back out there. So it's going to take a little bit of time. So as best as we can think about planning, really give yourselves a long rope. Don't just think, okay, I'm planning for right now, and then 6 months later, it's going to return exactly. Try and think about how you plan and navigate that out as best that you can. And like I said, just being really, really open to shifting and changing what it looks like right now, the collaboration right now. It may look a little bit different later, but understanding that I think is critical. And then the last thing that I'll say is, we're talking about this new normal, this new environment. I think it's so important for us to remember that this is just like a chapter in the book. It's not the whole book. And so, we're going to get through this. And so to my first point about giving and extending grace to yourself and others, just knowing that we're going to get through this, we're going to get through the other side of this. And so as best as we can, be thinking about how we get there and being flexible.
Yeah, if ever there were a mantra to repeat to ourselves, it's maybe take a deep breath right now and this too shall pass. So thanks, Mandel, that was awesome. Tarek, I see you nodding, so I'm going to turn the same question over to you to round this out.
Yes, so I concur. And I think for me, it's get creative, but stay focused. If there were ever a time where you were going to be able to reap the benefits of spending countless hours in wordsmithing on your mission, now is it. Because that's going to be your guiding light. That's going to be the thing that's going to help you figure out what you ought and ought not be trying to engage in at this time. And, that's the focus. And the creativity then is, how does that manifest? It used to manifest in one way, and now the external forces are going to push you to manifest in another way. But that mission should still be served. So that really, I think, should continue to be the guiding principle for any nonprofit, is look at your mission and use that as your filter to determine what you are and aren't going to end up doing. And with that, you should also be giving yourself space, time, and opportunity to look beyond now and start thinking about what does tomorrow look like, because the end of it is we don't know, right? We don't know what it's going to look like. We don't really understand what the landscape is going to be, but we know they're going to be kids, and we know that they're going to be kids that need to be served. So if you can continue to keep that in your mind, then you can, again, use that as a guiding principle to understand how you're going to shift. And, given that there are going to be contractions within your revenue streams, be it municipal and school contracts not being there and other funders going away, where your creativity has limits and you have to make hard decisions, you can make them in good faith, right? And understanding that that's not a failure on your part, so much as it is an adaptation to the reality to which you're faced. So I think, that's another way to kind of piggyback on Mandela's point about grace, but giving yourself an opportunity to make some of those hard decisions without guilt, because you've had to, and you've got to make some of those choices. So I think if you can find ways to get past surviving and figure out, okay, how do I set myself up to thrive within the philosophical framework that we've set for ourselves through our mission, I think those are going to be tools that are going to help you filter out some of the noise, because there's going to be a temptation to get pulled into all kinds of different things, because there's so many needs now that are going unmet. And there's that pull, right? There's an instinct there to say, okay, I've got to go help do this, that, and the other thing. And again, take that deep breath and really ask yourself, am I really the best, person, organization to meet this need? And if I am not, who is? Can we call them? And I think that's where you can start to figure out who can help fill in some of those blanks, and help you rewrite that story, right? So as much as this is just another chapter in the book of, what is life, it's also another chapter in the book of what your organization is, right? And knowing that, you can now use those experiences to continue writing a new story and changing that narrative and have it evolve with what's going on around you. So stay creative, stay focused, and keep connected to the people around you. And that will sort of help you figure out how to make some of these hard decisions.
Some excellent words of wisdom, Tarek. Thank you all for your thoughts on that last question. I know it's not an easy one to answer. Certainly, it's there's some sobering news out there, but I think the overall consensus is keep being creative, keep giving yourself the space to breathe, to learn, to expand, to do what you do well. So I'm going to actually turn to a question from the audience. We have a question from Adam Arango, who is a coalition partner from Education Through Music in New York. So Adam says, it's so important what Mendel said about school arts budgets being slashed. Is there a national coordinating effort for advocacy we can join? Want to figure out how we all can help. Any thoughts?
So, I mean, the first thing that comes to mind on my end is, checking in with the folks over at the Arts Ed Data Project. I think they would be a really good source to help start grounding your advocacy efforts. And I think that is to say that I don't know that there is a named and organized effort on that front on a national level, but I know that there are many a grassroots effort that are really working towards those very same ends. And I think one of the things that comes to mind in terms of the narrative, and some of the rhetorical tools, is now that you've got young people who ostensibly will be returning to school at some point, when we're not sure, but when they do return, it's almost certain that many of them will be returning from having experienced significant trauma, right? Either through the isolation and sort of disruption in their ability to connect with the world in a way that they understand, as well as experiencing any losses, right? Whether that be, financial trouble from parents and family members, losing jobs, actually losing family members to the disease and other related things. So now you have a more intense social emotional need for young people coming in. And as much as we would love to have that need met by counselors and therapists, those are in high demand and are high cost, and music is an excellent bridge to that social and emotional care. So that's another space that you can use to sort of talk about why music should continue to be a core part of a young person's experience at school, because we're going to need it, is the short story. You know, we've got this is an unprecedented experience when you have young people having missed this much in in-person time. So again, I would check out the Arts Ed Data Project and connect with that team to understand what other advocacy efforts you can attach yourself to. Check out NAM, and check out the NEA, and really look into some of those resources. But start arming yourself with the data and the information, and you can use that to help create these arguments that I think are going to be effective at helping to secure and protect funding.
Yeah, I echo everything Tarek just said. I would also say, in addition to sort of the data project, checking your state associations for arts and music. If they're not already resources that are there on the advocacy efforts, start it. There are tons of grassroots organizations that are already in your particular state. I'm not sure where you are, Adam. Thanks for your question. That are not already in existence, but it's very easy to reach out to your local elected leaders and tell them how much you value arts and music education. And given the fact that everyone is at home, reaching out to fellow arts educators, friends, parents, students, to all share a sort of collective voice, I'd begin doing that. It's a great opportunity to talk about, how music impacts all of our lives, and just encourage, in addition to sort of broader education cuts, that arts and music ed continue to stick around, to the point that Tarek made. We know how much music impacts our students on a social and emotional learning level.
And if I would just add two more things, just quickly, because these gentlemen are just fantastic and they cover so many great points to this topic, but I would just add specifically for New York, you may want to also check out, I think it's Americans for the Arts in New York City, because they may have some great resources for you to be able to connect with others who have the same mindset of what you're trying to accomplish. And then I'll also just mention, I know that the Recording Academy does a lot of great things around advocacy. And so whether or not they're specifically connected to what it is that you want to do, but it's really great for them to know, because every year there's a lot of things that they really try to tackle in regards to advocacy for artists. And so I think it would just be really good for the folks in your area in that chapter to also know what's happening.
Yeah, this is all great advice. And I'll reiterate, both NAM Foundation is an excellent resource for grassroots advocacy. They have some toolkits there that you can use. One thing that we have, barely scratched the surface on is data, and how important it is for arts and music and education organizations to really be collecting data that tells a story. We're very creative spirits, and we're often good about, feeling passionate about the arts and music being a part of our lives. But I think now more than ever, we really need to back all of what we know up with some hard facts. So I think basically what I'd like to do now is I'm going to give you each just one final conclusion, a chance to offer a little bit of wisdom to those who are watching, just a final thought that you might like to share. And Mendel, I'm going to start with you.
Gotcha. Well, thanks again for having me. I think these conversations are just extremely important in this time. So thank you all for hosting these conversations, and really sort of shedding a light in sort of how organizations and foundations are thinking about this from a philanthropic lens. I can't tell you how much that's important. I know at the Country Music Association Foundation, our team is deeply committed to this work. We believe in it. We believe in the partners who we work with each and every day. And I know that our incredible and talented team, Tiffany, Fallon, if you guys have questions, if you want to reach out to them, if you need something from them, they will do everything in their power to get it if they don't already have it. And so I just can't stress that enough, that we see ourselves as partners in this work and want to remain committed to supporting arts and music ed. to my point earlier about sort of, getting through this, I know that we will, but we'll get through it together as a community, as one, as people who love arts and music ed. And so I am excited for that. I know that I hang my head on that we'll make it through this. And I'm looking forward to seeing all of the amazing work that comes, not from this time, post this time. I just can't wait to see it. So thank you.
Thanks, Mendel. Perrolli, a few last words.
Sure. First of all, just again, thank you for having me today. I'm really glad to be on a panel, not just with you, Emma, you're fantastic, but both of these gentlemen have just done a fantastic job of sharing just ideas and brilliant things that we can do moving forward. I would just, first of all, just like to say, I want to commend not only GMEC, but just all the organizations that right now that are keeping the narrative alive that the arts are important. I do think that sometimes the lack of support for the arts is also just sometimes a lack of the narrative of the importance of it. I think sometimes when you have so much of a good thing, you start to take it for granted. And so as much as we depend on artists and the arts to keep us through these times, these are usually the first things that get cut. So I just think that we should continue this conversation, continue to talk about how important it is that we focus on supporting those who are creating, those who are educating our young people. And I would just say on behalf of Wells Fargo, thank you so much to the work that all of our nonprofit partners are doing, but specifically in this space for the work that everyone is doing day in and day out to continue to keep hope alive in these times. And I will also just lastly say to continue to take care of each other, but to make sure that we also take care of ourselves. The world is not the same without those of us who are bringing the light to it. So make sure that you take care of yourself. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Perrolli. And last but not least, Tarek.
Well, thanks again for having us. And I think the thing that comes to my mind is that I think we've done ourselves a disservice calling it social distancing, right? I think it's really physical distancing. Folks need to stay connected. I think that is the thing that's going to get any and everybody through this, is being connected to one another. Call your people, call your people, call your people, right? Whoever that is, your community, your young people, your team, your staff, your boss, your funders, stay connected, because nobody's going to get through this alone. And I think as long as we continue to maintain and nurture our relationships in our communities, that's going to be the thing that we're going to be able to get out on the other side of this. And it's through those connections that you're going to get your stories. That's where you're going to get the things that you're going to be able to say and tell, and remember these times and capture those opportunities. So stay connected and tell your stories.
Awesome. Thank you, Tarek. So I'm going to start to wrap this up. I'm going to close out and give a little bit more information. But first of all, thank you to all three of our panelists today. Really some inspiring words, some encouraging words, and some good advice on where to turn in these difficult times. So thank you all three, Tarek, Perrolli, and Mendel. Really appreciate your time today. This stream, just so you know, will be archived on our YouTube channel, so you can go and watch it on end as needed, and that will be up in a short while. So please check that out. Also, I encourage you to check out our online hub of resources at grammymusiced.org/resources. We're compiling as many ideas, suggestions, thoughts from our coalition partners on where to find resources, how to make the best of this time, how to keep making music in your daily lives. And finally, I'm going to make a plug for tomorrow at 1 p.m. Eastern. We have a weekly series hosted by the incredible cellist and artist ambassador, Sophia Basilar, in honor of Teacher Appreciation Week. Sophia is actually going to be having a conversation with one of her most important teachers. So that is happening tomorrow at 1 p.m. Sophia will be joined by Steve Hackman, who is an incredible composer, conductor, and producer. And then after the stream on Instagram Live, Steve is going to hop over to Facebook, where he will stream a live performance using the Dolby On app. So please be sure to check it out. It's great content, it's good conversation, and it's a nice way to keep our creative spirits high. So thank you again to everyone for joining. I hope we all have something to take away from this conversation. Please, everyone, take care and stay well. Thank you.